Cool? Awesome. Enjoy, guys.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to see you all. And I've known a lot of you for a long time, but I didn't know so many of you were twins. News to me. So, today, what I thought I would do is read you the story of Max Goes to Jupiter. And I think most of you are familiar with the books, but just in case, you know that the first book I did was Max Goes to the Moon, and Max helped us get our moon colony started in that story, which of course we don't have for real yet, but hopefully we will, maybe in not too long. And after that, Max helped us go off on our first trip to Mars, the first time people had ever gone to Mars, and he made quite an amazing discovery there that some of you might know about, but I'll let you read about it later. And those of you who know our real dogs, well, you know that the real Max, who went to the moon and Mars in the stories, died a few years ago, which means I couldn't send him somewhere else. But we have a new dog, some of you have met, named Cosmo. And Cosmo, you know, there's this person you may have heard of named Miley Cyrus, I think, and she plays a character called, what was it again? Hannah Montana, right. You know, so her real name is Miley, but she doesn't mind going by Hannah for the story, right? Well, we talked to Cosmo, and he said it would be okay if we called him Max in the book. So Cosmo plays Max, and you'll notice as we read the story that in the story you'll hear that this Max, is the grandson of the original Max. So that should all come clear. Now you can see here that Max goes to Jupiter. There he is in his spacesuit, but he's not on Jupiter, is he? There's Jupiter up in the sky. He's on one of Jupiter's moons. In this case, he's on Europa, and we'll hear more about Europa as we go along. And of course, he's playing space soccer. This is the story of how Max the dog helped humanity leap beyond the realm of the inner solar system on a visit to explore the giant planet Jupiter and its wondrous moons. And incidentally, in this picture, you see a lot of the characters in the story, and you see Jupiter, and you see our character Nathan in the story holding a little globe of Earth. And in this picture, we have Earth and Jupiter correctly scaled. In other words, if this was the real Earth, this is how big Jupiter really is compared to Earth. So you can see Jupiter is a very big planet. In fact, some of you may recognize this feature on Jupiter. What's that called?
That's called the red spot.
The red spot, the Great Red Spot. The Great Red Spot is actually a giant storm on Jupiter, and you can see that Earth compared to Jupiter is so small that Earth could actually fit inside the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. So it is a really big planet. Max was ready, his training was complete, and his spacesuit fit perfectly. In a few days, he would be bound for Jupiter. Tori, now all grown up, would be the mission's chief scientist. Max's younger friends would stay behind, but they could see where he was going. Jupiter, king of the planets, is often the brightest object in the night sky. Tori showed the children how they could spot some of Jupiter's moons through binoculars. So there you see them looking up through the binoculars, and Jupiter's actually up there in the painting. Max was a natural choice to go along on the first human trip to Jupiter. After all, it was his grandfather, also named Max, who had been the first dog to go to the moon and Mars. Remember I told you it had been his grandson? Maybe even as a puppy, Max had loved to sit in the lap of one of his human friends, listening to stories of his grandpa's space adventures. And you may notice that this is back when he was a puppy, and there he is, sitting in the lap of one of his human friends, who some of you may recognize. And of course, now we'll jump ahead to the real time of the story, right? This was looking back at when Max was a puppy. Now we go forward in time, and you might notice that Max is still sitting on the same human friend's lap. He just got a little bigger. Now, Max sat attentively while his friend Nathan talked about Jupiter's importance in human history. Jupiter has always been important in myth, he said, but about 400 years ago it helped change the entire course of human history. I know it sounds a little silly now, but at that time almost everyone believed that Earth was the center of the universe. So we know that Earth is a planet going around the sun, right? But people didn't used to know that. 400 years ago and all the time before that, they thought the sun went around Earth. And they thought all the planets went around Earth. And they thought all the stars went around Earth. And if you think about it, it's not such a silly idea. Because every day we see the sun rise up in the east, right? And set in the west. So it looks like the sun is going around us, doesn't it? And it looks like the stars, they rise up and set also. So it looks like the stars are doing the same thing. Of course, now we know that the reason it looks like things go around us every day is because we're rotating, right? But people didn't used to know that. Well, continued Nathan, in 1609, a man named Galileo built a telescope and started using it to study space. Galileo made many amazing discoveries, but I think the most important was when he found 4 moons orbiting around Jupiter. You know what that meant, right? Max, who was playing with a tree, appeared to have no idea. It was proof that not everything in the universe goes around Earth, and it helped convince people that our Earth is just one planet orbiting one star, and not the center of everything. Max, exhibiting this troublesome streak, something his grandpa never had, jumped again and almost knocked Nathan over, and as you could see, sent Nathan's report pages flying across the room. Now let's think about what Galileo did. Galileo built his telescope, right, 400 years ago. He builds his telescope and he looks up at the sky and he looks up at Jupiter. And much to his surprise, when he looks through the telescope, of course he sees Jupiter, that's not surprising, but he also sees some dots near Jupiter that you can't see without the telescope. And he watches those little dots night after night, and pretty soon he realizes that those dots are moons going around Jupiter. And if they're moons that are going around Jupiter, that means they're not going around Earth. And if you used to believe that Earth was the center of everything, that everything went around Earth, all of a sudden, the moment Galileo sees those moons going around Jupiter, you know that the old idea was wrong. And that's how he proved that Earth is not the center of the universe. Max wasn't done yet, but neither was Nathan. Today, he concluded, we know Jupiter actually has dozens of moons. But the 4 discovered by Galileo, called Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, are by far the biggest of them all. The class applauded, just as Max collided with Nathan, and they crashed together to the ground, luckily right at the end of the report. And of course, no human being has ever been to Jupiter, but we have sent robotic spaceships there. And those robotic spaceships have taken lots of incredible pictures. Here's some real pictures. I know you can't really see them from where you are, but there's Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, those 4 moons that Galileo discovered, photographed by one of our orbiting spaceships that's been to Jupiter. In fact, that spaceship's name was Galileo, after the original Galileo. Hoping that would be the last crash, Max and his friends were soon off to a new human-made island in the eastern Pacific Ocean. There they boarded the space elevator, which would carry them straight up for almost 3 days, until they were some 100,000 kilometers above Earth. The elevator rose faster than a jet airplane, but they felt little sensation of motion. They just watched Earth drop away as they rose, and noticed their weight gradually lessen with the weakening gravity. And in this painting, you can see the idea. Here's the ocean, right? So this elevator is on a platform, a man-made island out in the ocean. The elevator car, they are getting in. This is a very big elevator car, because remember, they're going to be in it for 3 days, so they need to have it big enough to have a place to sleep and a place to eat and everything, right? And you get the idea. They get into the elevator, here's the cable, and it goes up. Right, there it is, goes up. Keeps going 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 up. Until finally you're way up high, so that Earth is just a little ball way, way down below you. And way up at the top, of course, we have a hotel, so you can hang out for a while. Do we really have a space elevator like this?
We're going to.
No, we don't really have a space elevator like this, but it's something that people are really talking about maybe building someday, and it would be really cool. Not only because it would be fun, but because it would actually help us get into space. And you may know why. The reason is because right now, it's very, very hard to get into space. The only way you can get into space now is on a giant rocket like the space shuttle or another rocket that uses lots and lots of fuel to go up into space. And for that reason, it costs a lot of money to send anybody up into space because it needs so much fuel and such a big rocket and everything else. But if we had a space elevator, we wouldn't need all that fuel. We wouldn't need a big rocket. All you have to do is get in the elevator and push the button that says space and up you go. And the only cost would be for the electricity to take the elevator up the cable. And guess what? That electricity is free because we have solar panels. So if we had the elevator, we could all go to space very easily without spending a lot of money. Of course, it might cost something to build the elevator in the first place. But this is something people might really do someday. The Jupiter ship was anchored at the top of the elevator. I know it's hard to see, but it's up there. Commander Grant and the rest of the crew were already on board, completing the final preparations. They were ready to go when Max and Tori arrived. It was time for the children to say goodbye and take the elevator back down to Earth. Children might someday go to Jupiter, but the first trip would take only grown-up astronauts and one dog. Tori was in charge of the daily video broadcast back to Earth, telling children about the trip. Jupiter's really far away, she explained. It's more than 5 times as far from the sun as Earth, which means our trip from Earth to Jupiter is almost 2,000 times as far as a trip from Earth to the moon. That's why it will take us months to get there, even though our ship has the most powerful rocket engines ever built. Our ship gives us artificial gravity by rotating, she continued, but it doesn't feel quite the same as being on Earth. Commander Grant says it makes him feel like a hamster on a wheel. But you can see, it doesn't bother Max. And there you see in this picture, a little hard to see, but there they are, Max and Commander Grant playing soccer. You can see how the spaceship, on the inside there's Tori at her video station. The spaceship's kind of curved around so that it actually loops around like a giant donut. And that, by spinning that, it gives us the artificial gravity. And to understand that, this is a little tricky, so I need everybody's really good cooperation and trying to stay as quiet as possible. But here's what I need you to do first of all. Watch for me, okay? Watch when I put up my hand. When I put up my hand, that means I want you to sit down, okay? So be watching for that. But in the meantime, what I want you to do is pick a partner next to you, stand up, grab your partner's both hands, be very careful of the people around you, and start spinning around. Very, very good. Now, when you were spinning around, you should have noticed some kind of force on you that was pushing you in some direction. What direction do you get pushed as you spin around? Everybody knows, right? Out. You get pushed out, right? And what would happen if you let go? You fly backwards, right? And that's what happens whenever something's spinning around. Now, if you didn't want to fly backwards, we could put a wall behind you, and then you would get stuck against the wall, right? And in fact, maybe you've even been to carnivals where they have one of those spinning barrels, and you get in it, and it spins fast, and you get stuck to the wall, and you watch out to make sure the kid next to you is not throwing up. Now, you get stuck to the wall like this in the carnival. Why? Well, because you're stuck to the wall because it's spinning around, right? But you also have your feet pointed down because of gravity, right? If you were out in space, you wouldn't have the gravity pulling you down. You'd only be stuck to the wall. So you might think about this. What would it feel like to be out in space in something spinning around where you were stuck to the wall, but you didn't have any gravity pulling you down? And the answer is, you already know what it feels like. How do you already know what that feels like? Because you're stuck to a wall right now.
It's this wall.
It's this wall. What do we call this wall?
Floor.
The floor. But it's a wall, right? You're stuck to it because of gravity. But if you were in space and we had this whole room spinning around, you'd still be stuck to this wall, but instead of because of gravity, you'd be stuck to it because it's spinning around. And so that's what we mean by artificial gravity. So as long as you have a round spaceship that's spinning around, you can walk around in it just like normal. Except for that you're spinning around, which is why Commander Grant says it makes him feel like a hamster on a wheel. As the ship approached Jupiter, the crew fired the rocket engines, slowing their speed until Jupiter's gravity could hold them in orbit. They stared out the windows in awe as they orbited around Jupiter for the first time. Captain Anusha was the first to notice Earth in the distance. She couldn't help but marvel at the sight, especially as she thought about the different nationalities of all the crew members. It sure makes you think, she said. We all come from countries that used to fight each other. But now we're all working together here in a tiny ship from which our entire planet looks barely as large as a mote of dust. And there you can see Captain Anusha pointing out the window, and you see that little tiny blue dot? That's Earth, way, way off in the distance as they look at Jupiter in the window. Kind of amazing. Their first science mission called for dropping a probe into Jupiter's atmosphere. Tori explained the goals. We can't land on Jupiter because it doesn't have a solid surface, and its winds are too strong to allow us to take a ship into its atmosphere. So we're going to send in this robotic probe. You can see it hanging there in the painting, which will radio back information about Jupiter's clouds, winds, and gases. The rest of the crew prepared the probe. No one noticed Max's ball slipping into the airlock just before they closed the door. Think about that. What is an airlock? Well, you know that in your spaceship you've got air to breathe, right? You don't have to wear a spacesuit inside the spaceship. Now, if you were to open the door to the outside, all the air would go out of your spaceship, which would be really bad. So if you have this probe, how are you going to get it out? You don't want to open the doors and let all your air out. So what you do is you build a special room called an airlock. And the airlock has two doors. One door to the inside of the spaceship and one door to the outside. So at first, you can keep the inside door open and you can work in the airlock, get the probe all ready, right? Once it's all ready, then you go back inside and you close the inside door. That way your air from inside the ship can't get out. And then you open the outside door and let the probe out. And it all works great, except what else is going out?
The ball.
The ball.
It'd be funny.
The crew watched excitedly as the probe shot out toward Jupiter. See it off on its way to Jupiter right there? And there's the crew looking out the window down there. Equipped with a balloon, the probe would float in Jupiter's atmosphere for months. Max, looking out a different window, had other concerns. See his ball flying off into space?
It's like flying saucer.
Yeah, he's probably not too happy about that ball flying off into space. I'll tell you a true story. You might notice that there's some other balls right here inside the ship. So when we first wrote this story, we read it to some kids from around here to see what they thought. And some of the kids were very upset about the ball going into space. They said, well, what's he going to play with for the rest of the trip? So we said, okay, we'll add some extra balls into the painting so that he'll have some others on the spaceship. Although Max and the crew could not land on Jupiter, they could visit its moons. Their first stop was Io. They left the main ship in orbit while they descended to the surface in a small lander. As they walked on the bizarre surface, Tori reported back to children on Earth. When I say moon, she said, you probably think of a barren and created world like our own moon, but Io is not like that at all. As you can see, Io has volcanoes all over the place. There's even one erupting right over here. And this is true. That's what Io really is like. It really does have volcanoes all over the place that are erupting at almost all times. And the ground is covered by sticky dust. I've got to keep wiping off my helmet visor so I can see. Suddenly, Tori's voice became panicked. Max, she yelled, come back! Unable to wipe off the dust, Max could not see where he was going. He heard Tori's call on his helmet radio, but he did not know which direction she was calling from. He was lost. and wandering dangerously close to a river of hot lava. Luckily, Commander Grant saved the day, reaching Max just in time. Everyone was glad to get back to the lander. Tori had a little talk with Max as the lander rose up from Io to return to the main ship. She hoped he would behave better at their next stop, which would be the science highlight of their trip. And there you can see him getting his scolding from Tori. It's a little hard to see his face because the screen's a bit dark, but he definitely looks like he's being scolded. Do you think he will be behaving better at his next stop? We'll see, huh? As they approached Europa, Tori broadcast her report back to Earth. Wow, she began. You could probably see in the pictures that this is no ordinary moon. On the outside, Europa is made mostly of ice, meaning frozen water. And that's really what Europa looks like. There's Jupiter in the sky behind it. Europa looks like a cracked ice cube, because that's basically what it is. But that's only the beginning of the excitement, continued Tori. Although we can't see it, we're almost sure that there's a giant ocean of liquid water under all that ice. In fact, we think there's more ocean water on Europa than on Earth. And this also is really true. We really do think that there's an ocean deep under the ice on Europa. I can hardly wait to go down to the surface, said Tori. We're going to try to find a spot where the ice is thinner and launch our robotic submarine from there. And by the way, in this painting, you can also see the whole Jupiter ship. And you notice how it's round? So this is the part that spins around. So they can walk around here. You can see the windows they've been looking at in the other pages. The lander carried Max and the crew down to Europa's hard, icy surface. There was no dust here, but plenty of dangerous cliffs and crevasses. Still, Tori figured Max could see, so she let him bring a ball to play with in the weak gravity. The crew was busy using sensors to measure the thickness of the ice in different places. Several minutes went by before anyone noticed that Max was missing. Oh no, not again, sighed Tori. They found him more than a kilometer away, where he chased after his ball as he rolled downhill. Tori began to scold him. Max, are we going to have to leave you on the spaceship? But Commander Grant interrupted. Not so fast, he said, standing over the spot where Max's ball had come to rest. My sensor says this is the thinnest patch of ice around. Max, I think you found the spot for our submarine. They brought over the submarine, turned on its heater, and watched it begin to melt its way down to the ocean below. And here you can see the crew bringing over this little tiny submarine. It doesn't have to be very big because it's just a robot submarine. Nobody's going to be inside it. You can see they're bringing it over on skis because we're on an ice moon, right? And you can probably figure out the way it's going to work. You set the submarine down on the ice, and you turn on its heater. And that's going to melt a little bit of the ice, which means the submarine will sink down. Now, even though this is the thinnest patch of ice around, it's still pretty thick, probably still a couple of miles thick. Which means it's going to take a while for the submarine to melt its way all the way down through into the ocean. So they're not going to hang around, as we'll see on the next page. They're going to head back for home and just let the submarine slowly work its way down until finally it breaks into the ocean, because it can send its signals back to them with radio. Back aboard the ship, Tori spoke to children on Earth about what the submarine would do. It will take a few weeks for the submarine to melt its way down into the ocean, she said, and then it will start transmitting pictures and other information back to us and to Earth. We can tell it where to go. We'll start by having to dive deep in search of undersea volcanoes. And of course, we'll be on the constant lookout for any signs of life. Do you think we'll find any?
Yes.
Here in this painting, you can see the submarine has broken through the ice down into the ocean and it's diving deep. And you might notice there's a little bit of lava here. So it's discovered an undersea volcano. Now, of course, we don't really know if there's undersea volcanoes on Europa. We can't see through the ice to see what might be down in the ocean. But we do know that Europa's hot on the inside, which means probably it does have undersea volcanoes at the bottom of its ocean. We're not sure, but we think it probably does. And you may know, if you've watched some of the shows on National Geographic or the Discovery Channel, that we have undersea volcanoes on Earth, too. And wherever we see those undersea volcanoes, we find lots and lots of living things around them. So maybe, if there's undersea volcanoes on Europa, maybe there could be lots of life around them too. And that's why they're on the lookout. With their most important task accomplished, they decided to head for home. They flew past Ganymede so they could get a good look at the largest moon in the solar system. But they did not land there. Ganymede, Callisto, and Jupiter's many smaller moons would get their first steps from future explorers. There was little to see out the windows on the long trip home, so they often watched the big screen showing the video feed from the submarine. It was mostly dull. But one day, they were all sleeping when Max started to bark. He ran over and licked Tori's face until she got up. Then he woke Commander Grant and then the rest of the crew. Long afterward, people still argued about whether it was a coincidence or whether Max really paid attention to the video screen. But coincidence or not, there was no doubt about what the crew saw on the screen. Living creatures were swimming in the ocean of Europa. Is there really life on Europa? We don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. How will we ever find out? Well, hopefully someday we really will send a robotic submarine that will melt its way down through the ice to look. But that's still in the future. In this story, there is life on Europa, but of course we don't know for real. You may also notice if you look at the expressions on their faces as they look at the life swimming in the European Ocean, you can tell from their expressions that that life must look really amazing, right? But you can't quite tell what it looks like, can you? Why not? Because the screen is facing them, not you. And you may think, oh, that's so unfair. And you may also realize, of course, that the artist and the authors, we did that on purpose to you, didn't we? So that, yes, it's like a teaser, so that if we had shown you the screen, then you would know what we think life on Europa looks like, right? But by not showing you the screen, you have to use your own imagination to decide what you think the life might look like. Max was a hero, just like his grandpa before, and best of all, the work wasn't finished because the robotic explorers continued to send pictures and information back from Jupiter. There was so much data to analyze that children around the world were soon making their own discoveries and dreaming about their own trips to new worlds. And in fact, this part of the story is coming true already because even though we haven't sent people to Jupiter, we have had robotic spaceships go there and other planets, and they are sending about lots of information. And today there's some projects, one called One Laptop per Child, that's helping kids even in the poorest parts of the world get laptop computers so that they really can make their own discoveries about Jupiter and Saturn and other places. As for Max, he was just glad to get back home. It was his friends who understood the significance of it all. There may be life on other worlds, but no other known world has anything like the teeming life that thrives in every imaginable place on our home planet. Thanks to Max, they understood better than ever that Earth is a living planet and that all of our lives depend on taking good care of this remarkable world. That's the end. At the end of the story, you know I always put activities, so here's one about looking for Jupiter's moons for yourself through binoculars, and it shows you kind of what it would look like. But this is a picture. It's kind of amazing, even though it looks almost like a little kid's sketch. This is actually a sketch, a picture of a sketch that was made by Galileo himself 400 years ago. This is his actual notebook page, and you can see what he did was each line is a different night, and he drew Jupiter, the big circle, and the little dots are the things he saw near Jupiter. And at first you could see, oh, he didn't quite know what those dots were, but by watching night after night and drawing in his notebook, pretty soon he figured out that those dots were moons going around Jupiter, and that's how we learned that Earth is not the center of the universe. And it tells you about how you can learn some more about Jupiter from the web. And there's a picture of the real Max, who of course we really call Cosmo, with Grant and Brooke. And that's where the story part comes to an end, but we have some time for questions. And if you have a question, I need you to stand up and speak quite loudly so that everyone can hear you. So we'll start there.
Did you do the illustrations?
I did not do the illustrations. I write the story, and for this book, the first two books, I wrote the story myself. For this book, I worked with a couple of friends who were on the cover too. And the illustrations for this book were done by a man named Michael Carroll, who lives out in Denver, and he obviously is a very good illustrator. Okay, stand up so everybody can hear you.
Who wrote the Max's Ice Age Adventure?
Max's Ice Age Adventure was actually written by a boy who was in 3rd grade at the time, named Logan Wyman, because they had a contest to write your own Max Science Adventure, and he was the winner of the contest, so that's how we got that book put together. Sarah?
Did you take the spaceship?
Oh, well, good question. You saw that was a very big spaceship, because remember how in that painting of the spaceship, those windows were really tiny, and you remember that picture where they're looking out through the windows at Jupiter and how big those windows were? So there's a lot of room on that spaceship. Remember, they're going to be gone for many, many months each direction, so it's got to have lots of supplies, lots of places to sleep, and so on. So I didn't show you that in the story. You can use your imagination to imagine how you would design a spaceship, but you'd have to make sure you have everything accounted for, because there's no stores nearby. The great red spot changes in size over time. It gets bigger sometimes and smaller sometimes because it is a giant storm. But as far as we can tell, it's pretty much staying stable over time. Jupiter has other storms that come and go with more frequency.
Did you also write the Beyond UFOs?
I did, yes. I also wrote Beyond UFOs. That's a book for grown-ups. You probably wouldn't quite understand the stuff that's in it yet, but your parents would.
What was your favorite one?
Oh, you know, I love that question. What's my favorite of 3? Part of the reason I love that question is because I can't really answer it. Because, you know, when you write something, sometimes the way you're thinking about it is not the same way that your readers are going to think about it, right? And that's the case for me with these books. You all, since you've known the real Max and the real Cosmo, might have a better understanding of this than a lot of people do. But most people who read my books don't really know anything about the real dogs. But for me, since I do, each one of them has a special meaning. So Max Goes to the Moon was the first one I wrote about Max, so it's kind of special to me for that reason. Max Goes to Mars, you know that Max died a few years ago, and I wrote that book when we knew that he was sick. So it has a very special emotional feeling for me because of what was happening to the real Max. And then, of course, Max Goes to Jupiter has a special meaning to me because it's our new dog who we still have. So that's why I can't really answer my own personal favorite, but you can see why each one has a different meaning to me.
Which one was the most fun writing?
You know, I would say which was the most fun writing? They're all fun to write. I think you will find that if you're writing about something that you love, it's always fun, right? And I love space and I love science, so it's always fun to me to work on these. If I had enough time, I'd work on them all the time because they're really fun. Zoe?
Is Cosmo actually much more mischievous than Max?
Yes, Cosmo actually is much more mischievous than Max was, I would say. Yes. Yes.
Have you written any other books like for adults, like chapter books?
Have I written any chapter books for kids? For bigger kids? I have not written any yet. I'm thinking about it, but haven't done it yet. Way in the back.
Have any of these won the Caldecott medal?
No, I don't have any Caldecott medals, unfortunately, but we've got a bunch of other awards, so it's been kind of fun.
How long do you think you spent on the research?
Oh, that's a good question on research. You know, because these are books about science, the research is really the most important part to make sure all the science is right in it, right? In my case, because I've been a space scientist for a long time, and I've been learning about this stuff all my life, I don't actually have to go look up very much. I have it all in my head already. But that's because I've been researching it for about 30 years already.
I have a few questions.
Let's pick one right now, okay?
Are you gonna write another book?
Well, that's a good question. Will I write another one for the series? And the answer is probably yes. I haven't had time to start on anything yet. But you know what? Because these are books where I'm trying to teach you about real science, I look to see what would be the most interesting new science that we know. And some of you may know that right now we have a robotic spaceship that's orbiting Saturn. It's been orbiting Saturn for several years now, called Cassini. So we've been learning tons of new stuff about Saturn. So probably that's where I would send him next so that I could tell you about all the amazing things at Saturn.
Are you gonna write about the exoplanet?
Oh, an exoplanet. So that's a very good question. If you don't know what she's asking about, an exoplanet, she's talking about planets that are around other stars. That turns out to be really kind of tricky if I wanted to write a story about them, because other stars are really, really far away. Our fastest spaceship that we've ever built, the New Horizons spaceship that's on its way to Pluto, it took it about 1 year to get to Jupiter, and it'll take it 9 years to get to Pluto. And there's nobody in it, it's a robotic spaceship. And if it kept going, even though it's the fastest spaceship we've ever built, it would take it 100,000 years just to get to the nearest star. So if I wanted to send Max to a planet around another star, I'm going to have to figure out some way to build him a much faster spaceship. Maybe, is there somebody who hasn't asked a question yet that's got one more? We have one? Okay. Go ahead.
Alex?
Stand up so I can hear you.
Who's your editor?
Ah, my editor. Very good. I actually have a lot of editors that I work with to look at these. But the main editor that I work with on this book is a woman who lives in California named Joan Marsh. Natalie? How do you become an author? Well, of course, I actually already know that every single one of you are authors already, right? You've all written your own stories and books. So I became an author the same way you did, which is by working at it, right? Working at writing and stuff. And in my case, I especially worked at writing science. And so I got to write some books about science for college students, and then eventually I got to write these books. So I think maybe we will stop there, but thank you very, very much.